Fluorescent light, concrete walls, a corridor that never stops barking. Leashes jerk, metal rattles, boots scrape in a steady line. He doesn't pause. Officer_EC, calm, focused male officer, early 30s, medium athletic build, defined jawline, short textured dark hair, light stubble, slightly tired eyes, natural skin texture with pores, tactical police uniform with subtle wear marks, grounded realistic expression, walks like he's counting seconds. K9_Shadow, black and tan German Shepherd, black saddle pattern, black facial mask, golden tan fur, upright alert ears, amber eyes, small notch on left ear, muscular structure, realistic fur texture, tactical K9 harness stays glued to his left leg. No pull, no lag. People stare anyway. A chain link panel shudders once. Then again, an empty water bowl flashes silver under the lights. And K9_Shadow stops breathing for half a beat, like something in here just changed. Officer Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the kennel corridor and let the noise wash over him. Metal echoed with every bark. Concrete carried the sound and threw it back, doubled, sharper, more aggressive. The air smelled of disinfectant, old dust, and something harder to define. Stress, fear, dominance drilled into living creatures until it soaked into the walls. To anyone else, it was chaos. To Ethan, it was information. He adjusted the strap of his duffel on his shoulder and took one step forward. Then another. K9 Shadow walked at his left side, silent as a thought. The dog's dark coat absorbed the fluorescent light rather than reflecting it, his movements controlled and economical. No wasted energy, no nervous tics. Shadow's ears rotated slowly, cataloging sound, while his nose read layers of scent no human would ever perceive. Shadow did not pull. He did not lag. He matched Ethan perfectly. That alone earned stares. Most handlers had to constantly correct their dogs, small leash adjustments, murmured commands, physical reminders of hierarchy. Ethan gave none. Shadow stayed with him because he chose to. A tall figure detached from the shadows ahead, boots heavy, posture deliberately invasive. "Fresh transfer," the man said. Not a greeting, a judgment. Captain Maria Hayes didn't bother offering her hand. She didn't need to. Her authority lived in her voice, her stillness, the way the corridor seemed to quiet around her, despite the barking. "Officer Ethan Cole," she continued, eyes flicking to Shadow. "You're late." Ethan checked his watch. "I'm on time." A beat. Then the smallest hint of amusement crossed her face. "So you are?" She turned, already walking. "Follow me, and don't let anyone bait you today." That last part wasn't advice. It was warning. They passed kennels one by one. Dogs surged forward, teeth bared. Others froze, eyes locked. One slammed his body against the chain link hard enough to rattle metal. Shadow didn't react, but Ethan felt the shift in him, the subtle tightening, the readiness, not aggression, awareness. Captain Hayes stopped. "That one," she said, nodding toward the last kennel on the right. Inside sat a Belgian Malinois, larger than the rest, scar tissue cutting across his muzzle like a lightning bolt. His body was still, coiled, eyes flat and predatory, not wild, broken. "He's injured 3 handlers," Hayes said. "Senior staff thinks he's uncontrollable." Ethan studied the dog, then glanced at the empty water bowl. "How long since he's eaten?" Hayes didn't answer immediately. "That's not your concern," she said finally. Ethan met her gaze, calm, unflinching. "It is if you want him functional." A flicker of something. Respect, irritation, maybe both. "You'll meet the rest of the team this afternoon," Hayes said. "For now, get settled. Orientation's informal." She paused. "And Cole?" "Yes, ma'am. If you're here for what I think you're here for, don't rush." She walked away before he could respond. Later, outside the kennel building, the Pacific rolled in gray-blue sheets beneath a low sky. Ethan leaned against the railing, journal open in his hands. The pages were worn thin, filled with cramped handwriting. His father's. Master notes, observations, warnings. Shadow lay at his feet, head on paws, eyes half closed but alert. "You feel it too, don't you?" Ethan murmured. Shadow's tail thumped once. Captain Hayes wasn't the problem. The problem was deeper, institutional, systemic. That was why Ethan was here, not to make friends, not to prove himself, but to finish something that had been buried 12 years earlier under sealed reports and convenient lies. Footsteps approached. "Still reading ghosts?" The voice belonged to Dr. Lena Moore. Civilian clothes, sharp eyes, mind always running faster than the room. She held a tablet under one arm and coffee she'd forgotten to drink. "They're not ghosts," Ethan said. "They're breadcrumbs." She crouched, letting Shadow sniff her hand. He approved. "They're going to test you," she said quietly. "Not paperwork. Not simulations." Ethan closed the journal. "I know. And when they do," he stood, "then they'll show their hand." Shadow rose with him. Somewhere inside the kennel, metal clanged. A door unlocked, and a challenge began forming. The afternoon shift didn't arrive like a meeting. It arrived like a storm front. Boots, voices, laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. The kennel corridor, already loud, changed texture when the operators came in. The barking rose, then tightened into a sharper, meaner pitch. Dogs felt it the way humans feel pressure in their ears before weather turns. Ethan saw the ripple go down the line of kennels, shoulders stiffening, paws scraping, muzzles pressing to chain link. The animals weren't afraid of noise. They were reacting to intent. Shadow stayed close, loose leash, quiet body. But Ethan felt the dog's awareness sharpen the moment the first group passed the entrance. Shadow's ears angled forward. A low, almost inaudible breath left his nose, an evaluation, not a warning. Captain Maria Hayes stepped into the corridor behind the group, her face unreadable. Ethan caught the way her gaze flicked to Shadow and then to Ethan, as if asking, "Are you ready for what they're about to do?" A man peeled away from the pack and strode toward Ethan like the corridor belonged to him. Younger than Hayes, leaner, the kind of build that came from training hard and sleeping too little. His uniform looked too crisp, his confidence too loud. Deputy Lucas Reed. Ethan knew the name before the introduction because everyone talked about him the way people talk about a spark in dry grass. Useful, energetic, potentially dangerous. Reed grinned. "So you're the transfer." Ethan gave him a neutral nod. "Cole." Reed's eyes dropped to Shadow. He whistled softly. "And that is a problem for my ego." Shadow didn't move, didn't blink. Reed's grin widened anyway. "He always that quiet?" "He listens," Ethan said. Reed leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Word is, they're going to run you through tradition." Ethan didn't ask what that meant. He already knew. In places like this, tradition was often just cruelty, given a nicer name. Hayes moved in. "Reed." "Ma'am?" The grin stayed, but the edges tightened. He wasn't afraid of her exactly, but he recognized the authority. Hayes's eyes went to Ethan. "Briefings in 5 minutes. Stay close. Keep your answers short." "Understood." Reed shifted his weight, like a kid trying not to bounce. "What kind of dog guy are you, Cole? The dominance and correction kind, or the my dog is my best friend kind?" Ethan's expression didn't change. "Neither," Reed blinked. "That's ominous." Ethan's eyes stayed on the corridor. "My dog is my partner." Shadow's tail gave a single slow sweep, as if agreeing with the exact wording. Hayes didn't smile, but something in her shoulders eased by half a degree. Then the corridor went quiet, not because the dog stopped barking, but because the humans stopped talking. A presence had entered. It wasn't theatrical. It didn't need to be. It was the way the pack instinctively reorganized around the heaviest animal in the room. A senior operator, ranked higher than Reed, older than most, walked in and stood like he belonged at the center of gravity. Ethan didn't know him by name. He didn't need to. He read the posture, forward shoulders, chin slightly lifted, eyes that measured people the way a butcher measures meat. The man scanned the corridor and stopped on Ethan, then on Shadow, then back to Ethan, and he smiled with his mouth only. "Cole," he said, as if the name tasted familiar. "Welcome." Ethan kept his voice calm. "Sir." The man's gaze lingered on the duffel at Ethan's feet, then drifted to the worn leather journal tucked into Ethan's jacket, barely visible, but seen. Something cold moved under Ethan's ribs. The man hadn't guessed. He'd noticed. "Captain Hayes," the senior operator said, not looking away from Ethan. "You taking responsibility for this transfer?" Hayes's tone stayed even. "He's assigned to the program, yes." "Good." The man's smile widened. "Then you won't mind if we see what he can do." Reed's eyes lit up, half excitement, half dread. Ethan watched the senior operator's gaze flick to the far end of the corridor, to the last kennel on the right, where the empty bowl still sat, where the air smelled wrong. Hayes's jaw tightened. "That dog is a working asset," the senior operator interrupted smoothly, "and Cole's file says he's exceptional." Reed murmured under his breath, "Here we go." Ethan didn't move. He didn't argue. He didn't give the man the satisfaction of a reaction. He simply said, "What's the test?" The senior operator's eyes sharpened. 3 commands, basic obedience: sit, stay, heel. Hayes cut in. "He's been isolated. That's not—" The man turned his head just enough to acknowledge her existence. "Combat isn't fair, Captain. If Cole can't control his canine under stress, he has no place here." Ethan heard it then. The trap inside the phrasing. His canine, not the aggressive dog in the kennel. Shadow. Ethan's leash hand tightened a fraction. The senior operator smiled as if he'd won something without lifting a finger. "We'll use yours. Shadow, right? Let's see if partnership works when the animal is starving and terrified." Reed went pale. "Wait, what?" Hayes's voice dropped. "Dangerous. Who ordered that?" The senior operator's gaze didn't flinch. "I did." Ethan felt Shadow shift. The dog's breathing changed. It wasn't fear. It was the moment a soldier realizes the rules just changed. Ethan turned his head slightly toward Shadow, just enough that only the dog could see the movement. A silent signal. "Stay with me, no matter what." Shadow's eyes met his. Storm dark, steady. Then the senior operator nodded toward a handler down the corridor. "Bring the dog in. Lock Cole inside." Reed took a step forward. "Sir, that's—" The senior operator's eyes snapped to him. "Reed, you want to question your seniors?" Reed stopped mid-step like he'd hit a wall. Hayes looked at Ethan. There was anger in her face now, but also something else. Calculation, restraint, a soldier weighing consequences. Ethan gave her the smallest shake of his head. "Don't fight this here. Not like this." He stepped forward before anyone else could. "Open the kennel," Reed whispered. "Cole, are you out of your mind?" Ethan didn't answer. He had already made the decision. If the system wanted to break him, he couldn't afford to blink. And if someone had gone out of their way to isolate Shadow, starve him, destabilize him, this wasn't tradition at all. This was a message, a warning, or an invitation. The kennel door opened with a metallic groan. The smell that rolled out hit Ethan first. Not just hunger, not just stress. Something chemical underneath, something sharp and artificial. Ethan's pulse stayed slow, but his mind went faster. Shadow stepped in. At first, he didn't move like himself. His head was lower, his shoulders tighter. His eyes didn't scan the corridor the way they usually did. He locked on Ethan. Reed, phone half raised without thinking, whispered, "No way." The senior operator called from outside the chain link. "Go ahead, Cole. Show us what you've got." The door slammed shut. The sound had finality, like a coffin lid. Ethan stood still, breathing through his nose. He turned his body slightly, angling away, offering less threat, less challenge. His hands stayed open. His voice stayed low. Shadow froze, muscles quivering like tensioned wire. Then the growl started. It wasn't the warning growl Shadow used on patrol. It was deeper, rawer. A sound Ethan had heard only once before, years ago, in a disaster deployment when Shadow had been trapped and terrified in a collapsed structure. Fear turned into violence when there was nowhere else for it to go. Ethan swallowed, kept his face blank, and dropped his gaze slightly away from Shadow's eyes. Not submission, respect. He made the sound his father had taught him when he was still too young to understand why it worked, an ancient cadence carried in the throat, below language. A calm, rhythmic vocalization meant for one thing. You are safe. You are not alone. You don't have to fight me. Shadow twitched. The growl wavered. Then, like lightning, he launched. Ethan did not run. He did not shout. He shifted his weight, lowered his center of gravity, and turned his shoulder so Shadow's impact would glance rather than drive straight through. Shadow hit him hard enough to make Ethan's boots scrape on concrete. Teeth flashed. Ethan felt breath on his skin. For one heartbeat, the world narrowed into fur, heat, and the brutal truth that a working dog's jaws could end a life in seconds. Then Ethan did the one thing dominance trainers never did. He softened. He let his body go slack in the right places. He didn't fight the force. He redirected it. He dropped into a crouch, one knee on the concrete, hands open, voice steady. "Hey," he whispered. "Hey, Shadow." Not a command, a name, an anchor. Shadow's teeth hovered near Ethan's forearm, not clamped, not tearing, hovering. The dog's chest heaved. His nostrils flared, pulling Ethan's scent in deep, reading stress chemicals, heart rate, intention. Ethan held still and let Shadow know him again. "I'm right here," Ethan breathed. "I'm not leaving you." Shadow trembled. The growl faded into something smaller, uglier. Confusion. Ethan slowly sat back fully on the concrete. He averted his eyes again, giving Shadow space to approach without feeling challenged. Outside the kennel, every voice had died. The corridor was a tunnel of silence. Even the other dogs had quieted, sensing the tension like static in the air. Ethan felt the chain-link fence vibrate faintly as people pressed closer. Reed whispered, barely audible, "Holy!" Ethan lifted one hand, slow, deliberate, telegraphed. His fingers found the familiar spot behind Shadow's ear, the pressure point that released tension when fear had locked muscle into armor. Shadow flinched, then exhaled. A sound escaped his throat, half whine, half sigh. Ethan found the other side, gentle circles with his thumbs. Shadow's legs buckled, not submission, release. The dog lowered his head and, with a kind of exhausted surrender that broke Ethan's heart, laid his muzzle across Ethan's thigh. Ethan's throat tightened, but his face stayed controlled. "Good," he whispered. "You're good. You're safe." Shadow's body shuddered once, then steadied. Ethan didn't move for a full minute. He let the bond reknit itself, let Shadow's nervous system settle, let the chemical panic drain away. Then he spoke clearly, softly. "Sit." Shadow sat immediately, eyes locked on Ethan again, but now there was recognition there. Not predation, trust. "Stay." Shadow stayed. Ethan rose slowly, careful not to jolt. Shadow held position. Ethan took one step. "Heel." Shadow moved to Ethan's left side, shoulder aligned to his leg like they'd never been broken apart at all. Ethan walked to the door. Knocked twice, the prearranged signal. The door opened. Ethan stepped out with Shadow at perfect heel, the dog moving like a shadow stitched to Ethan's body. The corridor stared back at him like a jury. Reed's mouth hung open. His phone was still in his hand, but his thumb hadn't moved. He hadn't recorded a second past the moment Shadow had launched. Captain Hayes looked like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. The senior operator didn't look impressed. He looked unsettled. Ethan stopped in front of him. Shadow sat without command. Ethan's voice was calm, but it carried. "You isolated him," Ethan said. "You starved him." The senior operator's eyes hardened. "I tested him." "You traumatized him," Ethan corrected. "That's not the same." A ripple went through the corridor. Not laughter, not agreement. Something more dangerous. Doubt. Ethan continued, controlled as steel. "Shadow isn't aggressive," he said. "He's wounded. If you want reliable performance downrange, you don't get it through fear, you get it through trust." The senior operator's smile returned, thin. "You think you're going to change how things work here?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I'm going to do my job the right way." Captain Hayes stepped forward then, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "That's enough," she said to the senior operator. "Test is over. He passed." For a moment, Ethan thought the man might challenge her, but Hayes didn't blink. The senior operator's eyes flicked across the faces around him, reading the shift. He hadn't expected Ethan to succeed. He hadn't expected Hayes to back him. He made the smallest nod, like he was giving permission rather than conceding. "Fine," he said. "Cole's in rotation." Then, quieter, just for Ethan, "Being good with dogs won't save you here." Ethan heard the threat in it, and underneath the threat, something else. Recognition. The man saw something in Ethan that he didn't want alive. He turned and walked away, boots heavy, posture unchanged. But Ethan didn't miss the way his shoulders tightened. Like someone who'd just realized the animal he tried to break refused to stay broken, Reed drifted closer, eyes wide. His voice came out rougher than before. "That was... I've never seen that." Ethan glanced at him. "Then you've never seen partnership." Reed swallowed. "I'm sorry about earlier, about the vibe." Ethan's expression softened by a fraction. "Learn from it." Shadow leaned against Ethan's leg, solid and warm. Captain Hayes waited until the corridor cleared, until only the 5 of them remained in the noise and scent of the kennel. Hayes looked at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time. "That wasn't luck," she said. "No?" Her jaw worked. She was choosing words carefully. "I want to know why you're really here," she said. Ethan's eyes went past her to the kennels, to the chain link, to the concrete that remembered every scream and every lie. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out the worn leather journal. His father's handwriting stared up like a fingerprint. Dr. Lena Moore stepped in quietly, gaze sharpening. "You're going to show her." Ethan nodded once. Hayes didn't take the journal yet. She studied Ethan's face, his calm, his restraint, the way he didn't posture even after winning. Then she said, low, almost to herself, "This is bigger than dogs." "Yes," Ethan said. He opened the journal to a marked page, and for the first time since arriving, he let the truth step into the light. "My father didn't die the way they said," Ethan told her, "and someone here knows exactly what happened." Shadow's ears rotated slowly as if the dog could hear the shift in Ethan's pulse. Captain Hayes finally took the journal. She read. Her face changed. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just tightness around the eyes. A stillness that meant her mind was moving fast. Dr. Moore leaned in, scanning the entry. Her fingers curled around her tablet like she wanted to crush it. Deputy Reed looked between them, confused, then uneasy, sensing that whatever joke he'd been ready to make no longer belonged in the room. Hayes lifted her gaze back to Ethan. "Who wrote this?" she asked. "My father," Ethan said, "and he wrote it because he knew he might not come back." Silence. Then Hayes exhaled slowly. "If this is real," she said, voice carefully controlled, "you're not chasing a personal grievance." "No," Ethan said. "I'm chasing treason." Dr. Moore's voice was quiet, but sharp. "And if you're right, they're already watching you." Ethan glanced down at Shadow. The dog looked up at him, eyes steady. "You heard what he said," Reed blurted, unable to hold it in. "That senior, whoever he is, he basically threatened you." Ethan's voice stayed even. "He wasn't threatening me." All 3 looked at him. Ethan finished calmly. "He was warning me that I just made myself impossible to ignore." Captain Hayes handed the journal back, but her fingers stayed on it for an extra beat, like she didn't want to let go of the reality it represented. "We don't rush," she said, repeating her earlier warning with new weight. "We don't confront anything until we have proof that can't be buried." Ethan nodded. Agreed. Dr. Moore's eyes narrowed. "Then we gather evidence," quietly. Reed swallowed hard. "And what do I do?" Captain Hayes looked at him, measuring whether the rookie was liability or asset. Ethan answered first. "You do what you should have done earlier," he said. "You stop treating this place like entertainment." Reed's face flushed. Then he nodded, once, sharp, like a decision. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I'm in." Hayes didn't smile, but she didn't dismiss him either. "Good," she said, "because if what's in that journal is true, the next time they test you, it won't be in a kennel." Ethan looked out toward the distant ocean, gray beneath the lowering sky. Waves broke in endless repetition, violence in rhythm. He felt Shadow press closer, as if the dog could sense the direction Ethan's thoughts were going. Ethan spoke softly, not to the others, but to Shadow. "We're hunting wolves," he murmured. Shadow's tail thumped once. Not excitement, agreement. And somewhere down the corridor, behind concrete and chain link, a door clicked shut. A sound that felt less like routine and more like a lock turning from the inside. Night settled over the base without ceremony. The Pacific disappeared into black glass, waves audible but unseen, their rhythm steady and indifferent. Sodium lights flickered on, one by one, washing concrete and steel in harsh amber. Shadows stretched long and sharp, creating places where sound traveled farther than sight. Ethan preferred nights like this. They made liars careless. He sat alone in his assigned quarters, the room barely larger than the bed and metal desk bolted to the floor. Shadow lay beside the door, head up, eyes tracking every footstep that passed outside. Not anxious, just aware. Ethan spread the journal open under the desk lamp. His father's handwriting stared back at him, tight, efficient, written by someone who never wasted space or time. Abbreviations, shorthand, symbols, layered on symbols. A mind that assumed the reader was intelligent enough to keep up. Ethan was. He traced a finger along one margin, cross-referencing with notes he'd already decoded. Dates, locations, names that repeated just enough to matter. One of them surfaced again. Not a full name, just initials, and a pattern of reassignment that didn't make sense unless someone had intervened. Ethan leaned back, exhaled slowly. Shadow shifted, patting over and resting his chin on Ethan's knee. "You feel it," Ethan murmured. "Same as me." Shadow's ears rotated toward the door, then back. Someone stopped outside. A soft knock followed. Ethan closed the journal, slid it into the desk drawer, and locked it before standing. The door opened to reveal Captain Maria Hayes, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. She looked tired in the way people only do when they're carrying too much responsibility and not enough certainty. "I won't stay long," she said. "You're welcome," Ethan replied. She stepped inside, careful not to crowd Shadow. Smart. "They reviewed the test footage," Hayes said, unofficially. Ethan didn't react. "They weren't pleased," she continued. "Not because you failed, because I didn't." "Yes?" Hayes' mouth tightened. "You embarrassed people who don't like being embarrassed." Ethan crossed his arms. "Then it worked." Hayes studied him for a long moment. "You don't posture, you don't grandstand, you let results speak. That makes you dangerous." "That's what I'm counting on." She nodded once. "I spoke to Dr. Moore." Ethan's gaze sharpened. "She's already cross-referencing your father's notes with archived deployment data," Hayes said. "Quietly, off-network. If she's right, someone's been scrubbing records for over a decade." Ethan felt a slow burn behind his ribs. "Then we're not imagining it." "No," Hayes' voice dropped. "We're late." Silence filled the small room, broken only by Shadow's steady breathing. Hayes looked down at the dog. "He's calmer now." "He knows he's not alone," Ethan said. She met his eyes. "You are?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Not anymore." Hayes straightened. "Good, because tomorrow we deploy." Ethan's pulse ticked up, just enough to register. "Border interdiction," she said. "Officially cartel movement, unofficially. I think someone's running cover for something bigger." Ethan nodded. "A field operation gives us access." "And exposes us," Hayes said. "If the person you suspect is involved, they'll have eyes everywhere. Then they'll make a mistake." Hayes exhaled. "Get some rest. Tomorrow won't be forgiving." She paused at the door. "Cole?" "Yes, ma'am. If this goes where I think it's going, I need you to understand something." Ethan waited. "Once we pull this thread," she said, "we don't get to choose how much unravels." Ethan's voice stayed steady. "My father knew that too." Hayes gave a small nod and left. The door closed. Ethan sat back down and reopened the drawer. The journal felt heavier now. Shadow pressed closer, flank against Ethan's leg. "Tomorrow," Ethan whispered. "We watch, we listen." Shadow's tail moved once, slow and deliberate. The desert at night was colder than people expected. Ethan crouched behind a low rock formation, night vision painting the world in shades of green. The abandoned structure ahead sat like a scar against the land, old mining equipment rusted into permanence, new footprints cutting paths through ancient dust. Shadow froze, ears forward, nose working. Ethan rested a hand lightly on Shadow's shoulder. "What do you have?" Shadow shifted weight, then angled his head toward the wind. Multiple scents, fresh, human, and something else beneath it. Metal, oil, something sterile and wrong. Ethan keyed his mic. "Contact, multiple individuals, 2-hour trail, heading toward the structure." Captain Hayes' voice came back calm, but tight. "Hold position. All teams observing." Ethan obeyed, but his mind raced. 3 vehicles emerged from the darkness. New, armored, moving with discipline no cartel ever bothered to learn. Ethan adjusted magnification. His stomach sank. "Those aren't smugglers," he murmured. Shadow growled softly, not aggression. Warning. Gunfire exploded without warning. The desert lit up in muzzle flashes, chaos ripping through the night as 2 groups collided, one expected, one very much not. Ethan moved on instinct. Shadow stayed glued to him as they advanced, low and fast, bodies flowing over rock and dirt like water finding cracks. Voices shouted. Orders overlapped. Through it all, Ethan tracked movement toward the structure's entrance. 3 men hauling metal cases, moving with urgency. The markings on the cases caught the night vision's glow. Ethan's blood went cold. Radiation symbols. "Alpha Team," he said, voice controlled despite the surge of adrenaline. "The cargo isn't drugs." A beat. "What is it?" Hayes demanded. "Military-grade containers, radiological." Silence. Then, "Intercept. Do not engage alone." Footsteps approached. Ethan spun, then relaxed a fraction when he recognized Dr. Lena Moore emerging from cover, rifle steady despite the chaos around them. "I wasn't staying back," she said flatly. "Figured." They reached the shaft entrance together. Shadow dropped low, nose to ground, tail rigid. The scent trail plunged downward. "Movement inside," Ethan whispered. They descended. The air grew colder, damper, echoing with voices bouncing off stone. Ethan raised a fist. Stopped. Words drifted back through the darkness. "Vance will handle cleanup." The name hit Ethan like a hammer. He met Dr. Moore's gaze. She nodded once. Confirmation. They moved. The chamber opened into a repurposed staging area, industrial shelving, hidden vehicles, men working fast. Ethan stepped into the light. "Don't move," he commanded, weapon up. "Federal agents." It was a calculated lie. It worked on 2 of them. The third reached for his sidearm. Shadow hit him like a missile. The impact drove the man backward, bone crunching under Shadow's jaws as he locked onto the arm holding the weapon. Ethan didn't flinch. "Hold," he ordered. Shadow held, control, precision, trust. Dr. Moore secured the others with zip ties, hands steady. Ethan stepped closer, voice hard now. "You know what you're moving," he said. "You know what it does." Silence. Then a familiar voice cut through the chamber. "They work for me." Ethan turned. The senior operator from the kennel stepped into view, rifle leveled, eyes cold and sure. Behind him, 2 more armed figures spread out, covering angles with professional ease. Ethan's mind calculated distances, angles, odds. Unwinnable. The man smiled. "Lower your weapon, Cole." Shadow growled. Ethan didn't move. "You killed my father," Ethan said. The man's smile didn't fade. "Your father was a problem." The words landed like a verdict. Rage surged, but Ethan locked it down. "On your knees," Ethan said calmly. "Hands behind your head." The man laughed, and then everything detonated. Dr. Moore lunged sideways. Ethan rolled, firing. Shadow launched again, this time without command. Gunfire thundered in the confined space, echoes stacking into a roar that shook bone. One of the backup operators went down hard. Shadow took the other, jaws clamped with brutal efficiency. The senior operator drew a knife. Recognition flashed in Ethan's mind. Old photos, old reports, the same blade, the same hands. He surged forward, pain blooming as he was slammed into the stone wall, breath knocked from his lungs. The knife came up, and Shadow hit the man from behind, crushing the arm holding the blade. The scream was raw. Ethan recovered, knee driving up, weapon snapping back into line. One shot. The man collapsed, clutching his shoulder. Shadow released immediately and returned to heal. Silence fell, broken only by labored breathing. Ethan stood over the fallen operator, gun steady. "You're under arrest," he said, "for treason and murder." The man laughed through blood. "You think this ends with me?" Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger. A hand settled on his shoulder. Captain Hayes. "Don't," she said quietly. "We need him alive." Ethan exhaled and lowered the weapon. Outside, the firefight faded. Inside, the truth lay bleeding on the stone floor. Ethan knelt beside Shadow, checking him quickly. Minor cuts, nothing more. "You did good," he whispered. Shadow licked his hand once, tail flicking. Above them, somewhere in the desert night, the first crack in a long protected lie widened, and the wolves, exposed at last, had begun to bleed. Dawn came slow and colorless. The desert gave up the night reluctantly, as if it didn't want to witness what followed. By the time the transport vehicles rolled back through the gates, dust-streaked and silent, the sun was a thin blade on the horizon. Ethan sat in the rear of the armored truck, Shadow pressed against his leg, solid and breathing. Across from him, the senior operator, hands bound, shoulder wrapped in hastily applied gauze, stared at the floor like a man already rehearsing his next lie. Captain Maria Hayes rode up front. She hadn't said a word since the arrest. That silence carried weight. NCIS vehicles were already waiting when they arrived. Flashing lights cut across the concrete, throwing blue and red reflections onto steel walls. Dr. Lena Moore was the first to dismount, face tight, eyes already scanning for threats. Deputy Lucas Reed followed, pale and shaken, but upright. Ethan stepped down last. Shadow stayed glued to him, eyes alert, posture protective without being aggressive. The dog's presence drew looks from agents who had seen plenty of working animals, but not this kind of quiet control. The senior operator was transferred without ceremony. No speeches, no accusations, just steel cuffs, measured steps, and the beginning of a long reckoning. Agent Torres, sharp-eyed, composed, relentless, met them at the perimeter. She took in the scene in seconds: the wounded prisoner, the secured containers, the way Ethan stood like he was holding himself together with discipline alone. "This just got very big," she said. Hayes nodded. "Bigger than any of us." Torres's gaze moved to Ethan. "You okay?" "Yes." It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the whole truth either. They didn't take the senior operator to a cell. They took him to a room designed for people who thought they were untouchable and were learning otherwise. Hours passed. Ethan sat in a windowless office while Torres and Hayes worked the room next door. Shadow lay at his feet, head resting on paws, eyes half-lidded but never fully closing. Every now and then, Ethan felt the dog's tail brush his boot, a grounding reminder. Dr. Moore came in quietly and slid a folder onto the desk. "He's talking," she said. Ethan looked up. "Not freely," she continued, "but enough to confirm your father wasn't the first." The words sank in slowly. "How many?" Ethan asked. Dr. Moore hesitated. "Enough." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "Who's above him?" Moore's jaw tightened. "We're still verifying, but there's a name that keeps surfacing." She didn't say it yet. She didn't need to. Ethan already knew. The call came that night. Ethan was alone in his quarters, Shadow curled beside the bed, when the phone vibrated. Unknown number. He stared at it for 3 seconds, then answered. "Officer Cole," the voice said smoothly. Cultured, calm, the kind of confidence that came from decades of not being told no. "I believe we need to talk." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "I have nothing to say to you," he replied. A faint chuckle. "You always were like your father, direct, principled, predictable." The name landed like ice water. "Who is this?" Ethan asked, though he already knew. "You know who I am," the voice said, "and you know I don't make idle calls." Shadow lifted his head, ears rotating toward the sound. "You arrested one of my people today," the voice continued. "That was inconvenient." "He confessed," Ethan said. Another chuckle. "He'll say whatever keeps him breathing. That doesn't make it true." "You ordered my father killed." Silence stretched just long enough to be deliberate. "Yes," the voice said finally. "He left me no choice." Ethan felt the words settle into him like shrapnel. "I have footage," the voice went on, "from Kandahar, raw, unedited. You deserve to see how it really happened." Ethan closed his eyes. "Meet me," the voice said. "Tomorrow night. Building 47. Come alone." "It's a trap." "Of course it is," the voice replied easily, "but you'll come anyway, because you need the truth more than you need safety." The line went dead. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. Shadow stood and moved closer, pressing his weight into Ethan's leg. "They killed him," Ethan whispered. "They knew exactly what they were doing." Shadow's tail thumped once. Not comfort, solidarity. Captain Hayes didn't argue when Ethan told her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten him with protocol. She listened. Then she said, "We don't send you in alone." He demanded it. "He doesn't get to demand anything," Hayes replied. "We turn his trap into ours." Agent Torres was already nodding. "We wire you, audio and video. We position teams. He talks, we record, we move." "And if he doesn't?" Reed asked quietly from the corner. "Then we improvise," Hayes said. Dr. Moore leaned forward. "He's confident because he thinks the system will protect him." "Then we make sure it can't," Ethan said. No one disagreed. Building 47 loomed against the night sky like a forgotten relic. Cold War concrete, dust, and silence. The kind of place secrets like to hide. Ethan stood outside the entrance at 21:45 hours, 15 minutes early. Shadow sat at heel, calm but alert, every sense tuned to the environment. The button camera beneath Ethan's jacket transmitted steadily. "Overwatch ready," Torres's voice came through the earpiece. "Copy," Ethan murmured. He stepped inside. The warehouse smelled of oil and rust and ozone. 4 figures waited beneath a single hanging light. The man in the center stepped forward. Silver hair, immaculate posture, ribbons that spoke of decades of service and blood. The architect. "You came," the man said. "I hoped you would." Ethan stopped 20 feet away. "You wanted to show me something." The man smiled and lifted a tablet. The footage played. Night vision, a patrol, a warning bark, an explosion. Ethan's father, alive, broken, reaching. A figure approached. A knife. The light went out. Ethan's breath hitched once. He did not look away. The footage ended. "That's the truth," the man said softly. "Not the story they told you, not the lie they buried him under." "You murdered him," Ethan said. "We removed a liability," the man corrected, "for the greater good." Ethan felt Shadow shift, muscles coiling. "You're confessing," Ethan said. The man laughed. "To you, who will believe it?" Ethan tapped the camera beneath his jacket. Silence fell. "What did you say?" the man asked. "Everything you've said tonight," Ethan replied evenly, "is being recorded." The man's hand moved. Shadow launched. Gunfire erupted, and the trap snapped shut. The warehouse erupted into chaos in less than a second. The mastermind's hand barely cleared his jacket before K9 Shadow covered the distance like a living projectile, 85 pounds of controlled force slamming into center mass. The gun discharged once, the shot ripping wide and sparking off concrete as Shadow's jaws locked onto the man's weapon arm. The sound was deafening. Concrete swallowed echoes and threw them back, overlapping into a roar that rattled bone. 2 of the men flanking the mastermind reacted on instinct, one raising his rifle toward Ethan, the other turning to run. They never got the chance. Metal doors crashed open on 3 sides simultaneously. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" NCIS operators flooded the space, rifles up, voices sharp and overlapping, movement clean and rehearsed. Red laser dots bloomed across chests, faces, weapons. The man to the mastermind's left fired twice before return fire slammed him backward, body armor absorbing the rounds but leaving him gasping, ribs shattered by kinetic force. He hit the floor hard and didn't rise. The second accomplice froze mid-step, hands snapping up as if pulled by strings. "I surrender! I surrender!" The mastermind hit the ground under Shadow's weight, pain tearing the composure from his face as the dog maintained perfect pressure, enough to immobilize, not enough to kill. "Shadow, release!" Ethan commanded. Instantly, Shadow let go and returned to Ethan's side, muzzle flecked with blood, posture alert but controlled. The entire confrontation, from first shot to final restraint, lasted less than 30 seconds. And in that half-minute, a 16-year conspiracy collapsed. Agent Torres moved in first, weapon steady, eyes burning with something close to satisfaction. "Captain," she said coldly, addressing the man on the floor, "you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy to commit murder, illegal trafficking of controlled materials, and the murder of a fellow service member." The mastermind laughed through clenched teeth. "You think this ends me? I have files on admirals, senators, half the people who sign your paychecks." Torres leaned closer. "Then they're going to be very interested in meeting you." She hauled him to his feet with zero concern for his injured arm. Ethan stood motionless at the center of the warehouse, adrenaline draining out of him in a slow, shaking wave. Shadow pressed against his leg, grounding him, warm and solid. Captain Maria Hayes approached, eyes locked on the man in cuffs. "It's over," she said. Not to him, but to Ethan. Ethan nodded once. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is." The fallout was immediate. By morning, the base buzzed with controlled panic. Commanders were grounded, secure lines lit up, names began disappearing from rosters. Others were escorted out in silence, uniforms stripped of insignia before the sun reached its peak. Dr. Lena Moore didn't sleep for 36 hours, compiling cross-referenced evidence, financial trails, encrypted communications, everything needed to ensure no one could bury this again. Deputy Lucas Reed testified without hesitation. "I saw it," he told investigators. "The dogs, the methods, the intimidation. Cole didn't make this happen. He exposed it." Agent Torres ran point with ruthless efficiency. Deals were offered only where they served the greater case. No immunity without consequences. No protection without truth. By the end of the week, indictments stacked higher than the desks that held them. By the end of the month, verdicts followed. Life sentences, dishonorable discharges, careers erased in black ink. The memorial service took place under a clear sky. Rows of white headstones stretched toward the Pacific, the ocean glinting beyond like a sheet of steel. The wind carried salt and quiet. Officer Ethan Cole stood at attention in dress uniform, new insignia heavy on his collar. Shadow sat beside him, ceremonial vest snug against his chest, posture perfect. Captain Maria Hayes spoke of duty. Agent Torres spoke of justice, but it was Ethan who stepped forward last. "My father believed dogs were partners," he said, voice steady despite the weight in his chest. "He believed integrity mattered, even when it cost you everything." He looked down at Shadow, then back at the assembled crowd. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. 21 rifle volleys cracked the air. Taps followed, mournful, final, necessary. When it ended, Ethan knelt, pressing a hand to cool stone. "It's finished," he whispered. "You can rest now." Shadow leaned into him, silent agreement. 6 months later, the kennels sounded different. Still loud, still alive, but the edge was gone. Ethan stood before a new class of handlers, men and women watching him with the same mix of doubt and hope he'd once felt. "Dogs aren't weapons," he told them. "They're teammates. If you dominate them, they'll fear you. If you respect them, they'll save your life." Shadow trotted to his side and sat, eyes bright, scarred muzzle lifted with quiet pride. Deputy Reed, now assistant instructor, watched from the back, a different man than the one who'd raised a phone for entertainment. Captain Hayes observed from the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But her nod said everything. Ethan had changed the culture, and it would outlast him. Years later, Ethan returned to the cemetery alone. Shadow was older now, gray threading through his dark coat, but still steady. They stood before the headstone as the ocean wind moved through the grass. "The pack's strong," Ethan said softly, "and it's staying that way." Shadow's tail thumped once, a promise kept,